Hello and good evening, everyone. Welcome to today's Career Discovery presentation on paying for college with the Bank of North Dakota. I'm Amanda Wydula, University and Student Development Coordinator here at Bank of North Dakota, and I will be leading you through today's webinar. Today, during this session, students will learn about what types of financial aid are available, where to search for scholarships, differences in student loans, and tips to keep costs down. Just some housekeeping items. In the menu of the webinar, there is both a chat and a Q&A function that we will encourage all attendees to use for questions or comments that you have about tonight's webinar. We will answer questions at the end of the webinar, but please put them in the Q&A when you have them so that you don't forget about them and they get addressed. All right, so today we will be talking about financial aid and all of that fun stuff. So when students go to college, the first thing that you're going to want to know is what are you actually paying for? So college expenses are broken up into 5 different categories of expenses. So that first set of categories comprises of 3 different types, and that is called direct expenses. So those are the things that everyone who's going to college automatically thinks of when you are thinking about how much it costs to pay for school. So the direct expenses are going to be tuition and fees, so the actual money it costs for you to attend courses. Books and supplies, so your books, your lab goggles, tools if you're going to a tech school, into a tech program, that kind of stuff. And then lastly, of course, room and board. So living on campus and your meal expenses. So direct expenses are tuition and fees, books and supplies, and room and board. And then the next 2 groups of expenses are considered indirect expenses, and that is personal expenses, so things like your day-to-day incidentals, shampoo, other toiletries, things like that, and then transportation expenses. So transportation expenses will really vary from student to student. Perhaps you're a student who's going to a college in a large urban environment, you're going to take public transportation everywhere and you get free public transport because you're a student. Your transportation costs will probably be minimal, where maybe you are going out of state or you're a commuter student and you're going to need to get back and forth from your classes and maybe a job. Or if you're going out of state, maybe you need to come home and take an airplane. So those kinds of transportation expenses are things that students should consider when they are looking at different colleges. And if they select a college that's out of state or something like that, they should build that into their college budget. So how do you pay for school? A lot of students, the first place to look is through financial aid. So what is financial aid? Financial aid is considered any scholarship, any state or federal grant, any federal work study, or any student loan that you use to help pay for college. And the way to get financial aid is by filing the FAFSA. The FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid, and the FAFSA is the form that collects family and student financial information. The website that you can do that at is fafsa.gov or studentaid.gov. And it's very important that students actually go to the correct website. So as long as it's .gov, you're going to be in the right place. There are a lot of websites out there that are FAFSA.com, FAFSA.org, studentaid.com, etc. And they will allow you to do the exact same thing that you're going to be able to do on the government website. However, you're going to go through all that work and you're going to get to the end and they're going to prompt you for your credit card information, which you should never have to do because the first word in FAFSA is free. It's the free application for federal student aid. And these third-party sites are not going to give you any leg up or any extra advantages by using their service to file your FAFSA. And tomorrow is the big day. October 1st is when the FAFSA opens. So seniors in high school or any student, current college students, tomorrow is the very first day that you can file the FAFSA for the 21-22 school year. So you can apply as early as tomorrow or, all through the rest of the school year. It is advantageous for students to apply earlier rather than later because we do live in a state that has state grants and other aid that is first come, first serve, which we will talk about in a few slides. So before you get started on filing the FAFSA, the student and one parent of a dependent student will need to sign up for an FSA ID or a Federal Student Aid ID. And this is basically a username and password that the student and the parent of a dependent student will use to file the FAFSA. Parents, if you've been around for a while and this is not your first time filing the FAFSA, or you recall using a PIN number from back when you filed the FAFSA, this has now replaced that PIN number. So the benefits of this, of course, is it is not government generated or appointed to you. You get to pick what your username is and you get to pick what your password is. So when you create this FSA ID, make sure that the student, you as a student, and the parent keep your FSA IDs and passwords handy because you will need to file the FAFSA every single year that you're in college. And again, studentaid.gov or fafsa.gov /FSAID. No matter which website you go to, even if you don't do the /FSAID, it's really obvious on the website where you go to get your FSAID. It's one of the main headers on the website. So some other things to get ready after you get your FSA ID, but before you begin filing the FAFSA, that's good to have to make the process as easy as possible. Of course, you already did your FSA ID, so you're good on that, but you'll also need your W-2, so both for the parents and for the student if they work, the Social Security number for all parties filing the FAFSA, your 2019 taxes, and that's if you're going to college in 21-22, so 2019 taxes, your driver's license or ID, and any record of money earned that is not reflected on your W-2 or your taxes. So that's important as well. Is parent information needed? So this is a very common question for students for a lot of different reasons. They might think like, okay, I'm turning 18, I'm an adult, why do I have to have my parents' information? Or my parent isn't helping me pay for college, why do they have to report the information? And the answer to that is because dependent students are considered still financially dependent on their parents, even though they're 18 or maybe their parents aren't helping them pay for college, maybe out of pocket or anything like that. But unless a student meets one of the criteria on the screen that makes them an independent student, a student is considered a dependent of their parents. So on the screen, things that would make a student an independent are that they're 24, they're married, they're in the military, active duty, or veteran, they have a dependent of their own, they were in foster care or ward of the court anytime after age 13, they were an emancipated minor, which actually in North Dakota, we're the only state that doesn't allow this. It's actually in century code. If they're in a legal guardianship, if they're homeless or estranged from their parents. And the nice thing about figuring out if you're a dependent or an independent student is that the FAFSA form has an entire section dedicated to yes/no questions about dependent versus independent. So if you answer yes to any of those, you will automatically be flagged as an independent student. And then when the college that you're hoping to attend or one of the colleges that you list on your FAFSA receives your information and sees that you're an independent student, they will follow up with you for additional documentation. So you can't just say, I'm estranged from my parents or something like that, because you do have to provide information to the college to verify that you are a dependent student. And if you're in a special situation where maybe that documentation is hard to come by, typically the financial aid office will help you through that process. So that's one nice thing about most financial aid offices, is that there is somebody there to help you, guide you through if you do need additional help with these types of things. Another common question that we get from a lot of students and a lot of families is, well, my parents are divorced, and parent one that I'm filing with is now married. So the rule basically is that students should file with the parent that they have lived with the most over the last 12 months. Typically, providing food and shelter for a student is considered the most financial support, so that's why that delineation is lived with most over the last 12 months. And if the parent that the student is filing with is married, you also need to report that spouse's income as well on the FAFSA. A couple common misconceptions is that it's related to which parent claimed the student on their taxes. Sometimes in divorced households, the parents will alternate who claims the child on their taxes, and it's not related to this. So it's strictly who the student lived with the most over the last 12 months. So even though you switch back and forth on that, that is not something that you should do on the FAFSA. It will create more problems than it will solve. So consistency on the FAFSA beyond that first year is really, really important. Um, so that is divorced or remarried parents. Just a reminder, we are taking questions in the questions box on the webinar menu. So you can go ahead and leave those in at any time throughout the webinar, and we'll address them at the end. All right, so the financial aid process. So what happens after you file the FAFSA? So there are actually two steps that you could basically do interchangeably. So you can apply to schools or complete the FAFSA, either one first, either one second. So applying to schools is important because each school that you apply to, you should list on your FAFSA form. Students can list up to 10 colleges on their FAFSA to receive that information. And then any school that you have listed on your FAFSA that you haven't applied to, you should apply to. So just make sure whoever you list gets an application from you and you complete the acceptance process. And that'll be important in two steps. So after you apply it to schools and after you complete the FAFSA, what will happen is you'll get a student aid report or an SAR. And this is basically just a transcript of everything that you put on the FAFSA that you entered into the form before you hit submit. So it's good practice to go ahead and review this, make sure there's not any issues with anything that you entered in. It's always good practice to double check. If you don't notice any errors in there, you can just file that away in your paperwork and move on. If you do notice there are errors, you'll need to log back into the FAFSA. So it's good to have your FSA ID, username, and password handy and correct those errors and then submit it again. And you will get another SAR then. So just go in, make sure all of that is updated. So after you do that and apply and get accepted to all of the colleges that you've listed on your FAFSA, the college will receive or will create an offer of financial aid for you as a student. And what that is, that's going to be a list of all of the financial aid that you have been awarded at that point in time. Typically, that's any institutional scholarships, so scholarships that come directly from the college itself, any federal grants that you might have been awarded. So we'll talk about grants in a few slides here. So any federal grants, and then lastly, any federal student loans that you've been awarded. In North Dakota, it's incredibly common for your offer of financial aid to be revised at least once, even multiple times, just because the North Dakota state grants and scholarships typically are put on the award letters at the North Dakota colleges and universities a little bit later in the year, so usually May or June. So your first award letter might not have all of the information that you'll need to make a determination, but once you get those offers of financial aid, it's good practice to take a look at them and see what each college is offering you and what your out-of-pocket expenses are going to be. So if you have trouble reading your award, you can always communicate with the admissions office or the financial aid office, who will help talk you through that and explain it. The next step is, if you do take out any student loans from the federal government, you will get a master promissory note or an MPN. And that MPN is your contract that says, all right, this is how much I'm taking out, this is what my interest rate is, this is how much my repayment term is, and I am signing this with the promise to pay it back with interest. And then lastly, the money is sent directly to the college or university that your student is going to be attending. That money will never touch the hands of the student until your student bill is paid off. And then in the event that there is excess aid that you borrowed too much, maybe you got a bunch in scholarships and other grants, which is great, you will get an excess check from that school. But if you do, evaluate where that money came from. If it's from scholarships or grants, wonderful. If it's from student loans, it is good practice to send that money back so that your principal balance on your student loans will be lower. Or if you don't want to send it back, save that money for other educational related expenses. So that's one thing that's really, really important to know about excess aid if you get it. All right, so another type of financial aid is federal work study. So federal work study is a financial aid program that allows students to work and earn a paycheck based off an award that they get through the FAFSA. So federal work study will allow students to work on campus. Typically, it's around 10 hours a week. Jobs are typically on campus, but they very well might be off. The pay varies from job to job and even from university to university. And students have to opt in on the FAFSA. So you have to say yes on that FAFSA to be considered for federal work study. And it is a need-based program. So even if you say yes on the FAFSA, it doesn't mean that you'll get it. But don't worry if you do want to work on campus. Typically, there's a lot of jobs available. Not every job on campus is a work study job. They might call it work contract or something else. So if you as a student want to work on campus, it might be work study, or your paycheck just might come from a different source. But there's a ton of jobs out there. For example, when I was in college, I worked in the admissions office. I gave tours and did all sorts of stuff for them. My roommate worked in the coffee shop and even in the biology lab as a TA. So there are a lot of different jobs out there. So grants. So grants come from the federal government, and there are several different types. So the Pell Grant is one that's available for families who are lower earners. So this is just kind of a ballpark, but to qualify, family income is typically less than $50,000. And the lower the family income, the greater the likelihood of qualifying. And even if a family maybe doesn't qualify all the way for it, they could get a portion of it. So full Pell Grant is $6,345 for this academic year. So that is the maximum amount of Pell that a student can get for the entire year. And just depending on where your family falls on the EFC, the estimated family contribution, will determine your eligibility for the Pell Grant. And speaking of expected or estimated family contribution, that EFC, that is a number that the Department of Education creates when you file your FAFSA. It takes into account your income, your family size, and a bunch of other factors to determine how much your family is quote unquote expected to help the student pay for college. So that's a determining factor for eligibility for a lot of need-based programs like the Pell Grant. The next one is the SEOG grant, and that one does have a higher income threshold for EFC on that. So that one is having a higher threshold, and that is a little bit of a lower grant amount, and that's up to $4,000. So it's not that you get $4,000 or that's it. You could get it on a scale or a percentage of that $4,000. Another option for students who are going into education or education-related majors is the TEACH grant, but this one I always say word of caution, because this is a grant that could turn into a loan. Say if a student doesn't graduate, say they take it out and change their major before they graduate, or they graduate in that degree program but don't fulfill the qualifications of that grant. So typically, when you take out this grant, you agree to work in a high needs school district for X amount of years after you graduate. Typically, those schools are highly urban or highly rural. We do have some of those sites in North Dakota. I couldn't tell you what they are, but we do have some of those sites here in North Dakota. So if you're a North Dakota student, you take out this grant, you want to stay in North Dakota, it is possible, but the TEACH grant is out there, but be careful. It's free money that turns into a loan if you don't fulfill the qualifications of getting that grant. All right, so next are state grants. So grants that come directly from the state of North Dakota. And I really should say grants and scholarships. In North Dakota, we're very lucky that we have a very robust grant and scholarship system in place for North Dakota students. So the North Dakota Scholars Program is a full tuition scholarship for students in the top 5% of ACT test takers. That award is determined by the junior year ACT. So top 5%, typically it's in the 30s. I don't know what the score is for this year to be considered for it, but it is equivalent to full tuition at one of the state colleges. However, you are able to bring it to a private school. So let's say you go to UMary, UJ, Trinity Bible, you could bring that scholarship to one of those colleges. So it's not just the public schools. So that's a really great program. The next is the North Dakota Indian Scholarship through the Indian Affairs Commission. That is a separate application, and that award is $2,000. The next is the Academic and Career and Tech Ed Scholarship, or the Academic and CTE Scholarship. That is $1,500 for a year until students reach $6,000. So this one is really great, and I'm not going to dive into it too deep because mark your calendars, October 20th, Jim Upgren from the Department of Public Instruction will be hosting a webinar to dive into this a little bit deeper. But the Career and Tech Ed Scholarship is out there. Students typically need to meet a GPA criteria, an ACT for the academic, and an ACT or a WorkKeys test score for the Tech Ed scholarship, and then for the CTE, take a certain amount of CTE courses in order to qualify for that one. And this one is for North Dakota students going to North Dakota colleges and universities, but it is deferrable. So if a student right now is thinking about going out of state, it is great practice to apply for this scholarship and get this scholarship and defer it instead of not applying and not getting it and then ending up coming back into the state of North Dakota because your plans change. And students' plans change all the time when you're in college or not, so it's good to get the scholarship and defer it. The next is the North Dakota State Student Incentive Grant, and this is the one that I mentioned earlier, how a lot of our aid is first come, first serve in North Dakota. This one is determined and awarded by the date that you filed the FAFSA, basically. So students file the FAFSA early. The earlier the better, because this is the grant that is first come, first serve. Students could get up to $1,950 for that grant. So you can go to BND for BND's website for more information, also the North Dakota University System website, or DPI. There's a lot of different places that you could get that information, but we're all here to help you and get that info to you. Your counselor is a good resource for that as well. All right, so scholarships. This is another topic that students are always asking about. Well, where do I look for scholarships? So Bank of North Dakota has a good start for you that you can look for statewide scholarships. Now, I always tell students that the best place to look is within their local communities. So students should always start local, and I advise that simply because your odds are better in your local community, because the scholarship applicant pool will be a lot smaller than a statewide scholarship and a lot smaller than a nationwide scholarship. So go to your counseling office, or if your high school has a foundation, like for example, the Bismarck Public Schools Foundation or the Fargo Public Schools Foundation, or whatever your education foundation in your community is, touch base with them to see what's available, your local Dollars for Scholars branch, any organizations or businesses that your parents are maybe members of or customers of, churches, places like that. There are a lot of scholarship opportunities out there, especially for high school seniors going into their first year of college. So start local. And then next, after you have looked at all of your local opportunities, look statewide. And that's going to be for North Dakota scholarships. So a good first place to start is North Dakota Dollars for Scholars. That is a statewide scholarship program that is operated by the Bank of North Dakota, and we give out anywhere between $85,000 and $95,000 worth of scholarships a year. And we do have scholarships for high school seniors, but also for current college students. So it's really important to sign up when you're a senior and then keep your profile active throughout your entire college career, because you could get scholarships each year if you just apply. And then lastly, look nationwide. And I know that these scholarships have a lot of applicants, and they might ask for a little bit more complex information sometimes, but if you apply for one, you never know. You could be exactly that student that they are looking for that scholarship. So another special note about scholarships, I mentioned it in with the FAFSA, is that they might prompt you to pay once you have completed your form. And this could be similar with scholarships. It's very common for scholarship scams to be out there that want you to pay an application fee to apply for a scholarship. If you do this, well, not if you do this, but if you see this, it is most definitely a scam. So exit out, turn around, throw that scholarship app in the garbage. You don't have to pay to apply for a scholarship. That is a red flag that that is a scam. So that is scholarships. And also don't forget to look at the colleges that you're applying to. Most colleges typically have a large foundation that awards scholarships to incoming students and current college students at that university. All right, next is student loans. So after you have looked at state and federal grants and scholarships, and you maybe need a little bit of extra money to help pay for your college costs, student loans is an option. So through the FAFSA and through financial aid, students may be able to get two types of federal student loans. The first is going to be federal direct, and within this federal direct, there's subsidized and unsubsidized. So the differences between these two types of student loan is that the subsidized, the federal government pays the interest while you're in college, where the unsubsidized begins accruing interest right away. This year, the interest rate on these federal student loans is 2.75. So that's a great interest rate for a student loan. Back when I went to college, it was 6.8, so that is a significant difference. So those are federal direct. And the nice thing about these is that students are able to get these without having a credit score and credit history, and they don't need a cosigner. So these are in the student's name, and they don't need that extra stuff that a lot of private banks do when you take out a student loan. So the next type of student loan is a federal plus loan, and that is a parent loan for undergraduate students. And this one is a little bit different than the federal direct. It is a federal loan. However, how this is different is that it's a parent loan. So mom and dad would take this out on behalf of their student, and then it would be in their name, and they are responsible for it. Now, this is another type of award that comes from the federal government that I always recommend that parents and families just really research before you decide to go this route, to make sure that it's the best fit for your family. Just because the interest rate is a bit higher than some student loans right now. I believe it's 5.3 is what the interest rate is. And then the fees are in between 1% and 2%. So it's not completely outlandish, but it is a slightly more expensive student loan than some of them out there. And mom and dad are responsible to pay this back. It's in their name, and repayment begins 30 days after the money is dispersed to the college, unless they apply for a deferment. And what that would mean is that a deferment, they wouldn't have to begin paying it back until after the student graduates, falls below half-time, or drops out. So very similar to how other student loans work. So the federal direct loans and a lot of private loans don't require the student to begin paying back until 6 months after they graduate, fall below half-time, or just straight up drop out of school. So those are the federal loans that are available to undergrad students. And then if you don't have enough money after that, then you can start looking at alternative loans. In Bank of North Dakota, we do have a student loan program. Tomorrow, our interest rates do change, so I haven't quite committed those to memory yet, but they are very favorable. We have variable and fixed student loans for students to apply for. And a North Dakota student is able to apply for a loan and take those anywhere with them. So it doesn't matter if they stay in North Dakota, if they go to Minnesota, or if they go to Hawaii. North Dakota residents are able to take this student loan wherever they would like. So yes, that is available for students. And there's no loan fees, low interest rates. You get to pick between variable and fixed. Now, the other item is that you do need to have a cosigner on that as well. Most students coming straight into college don't have the credit history or credit score required to take out a student loan on their own. All right, so federal direct, going back to those federal direct student loans and dependent versus independent. So dependent students are able to earn $5,500 in their first year, and then it goes up by 1,000 their second year and another 1,000 their third through fifth years, whereas independent students do get a little bit more in student loan options. So that'll be $9,500, $10,500, and then $12,500 in their third through fifth years. So some things for students to consider when they are needing to borrow to help pay for college, and frankly, when they're looking at different colleges and exploring careers. So the first thing that students should do is estimate what your future salary should be. And that's not median salary, that's not average salary, that is your estimated salary in your first job out of college. So That's really important because, you graduate college and you're going to be financially on your own for the most part. So making sure that you're able to earn enough so that you can repay your student loans, so that you can live somewhere, whether it's a home or an apartment, a townhouse, whatever. If you have a vehicle, making sure that you are making enough money so that you can pay for all of those expenses. And that, of course, is important because you need to make enough money to live, of course. So estimate those expenses as well. So what kind of car are you going to drive? What kind of housing are you going to live in? Are you going to have roommates? Do you maybe want to have children someday? So just, stacking up all of those adult expenses to make sure that you're taking on a level of debt that you can afford. So will you need to make payments? The answer is yes, but how much those payments are going to be, how long it's going to take you to repay that debt in full. Typically it's 10 years, but depending on your level of debt, it could be longer. So just making sure that you check all of those boxes, how much you're going to earn, how much your total debt load is going to be, and is the career that you're choosing and the college you're going to be a good choice for the amount of debt you're taking out. Bank of North Dakota does have some calculators on our website, so bnd.nd.gov, where you can see your total loan debt, how long it's going to take you to pay it off, a salary to debt ratio to see if that's a good level of debt for you to have or an appropriate level of debt for you to have at that time. So those calculators are really, really helpful. Next, so what can you do now? So this slide is more geared for high school students. So what can you do now? Of course, research. So the things that we talked about in the previous slide. So you're going to want to research, of course, the college that you're going to or the colleges that you're hoping to go to, how much they cost, do they have the major that you have? If you change your mind, what other majors do they have? What kinds of jobs can you get with those majors? And then, of course, when you're thinking about careers after college, research how much those careers make in different job markets. Maybe you've always wanted to stay in North Dakota, but maybe you've wanted to move to a big city. Obviously, if you're looking at moving to like Chicago or Seattle, something like that, the cost of living in those larger cities is going to be significantly different than it is out here. So just make sure you do your research on the front end so it doesn't come and bite you in the back end. If you're a working student, start making a budget and then start saving. There's a lot of different ways that you can make a budget. You can be a spreadsheet wizard, you can keep track of it on an app, you can write it all down, whatever floats your boat. The only wrong way to budget is to not budget. So that's really important. And then of course start saving, even if it's $5, per paycheck. $10 a paycheck, because at the end of the year, that's going to be, $60 that you didn't have. It's going to be a lot more than $60, but that's going to be saved money that you didn't have otherwise. And if you don't do any of those things, start, find a job, make a budget. Maybe if you don't want to work, maybe your parents give you an allowance, budget your allowance, and maybe even start saving some of that. You can take dual credit courses in college or in high school to get ahead. Typically, dual credit courses are offered for the very most common general education classes. And not only that, they are often at a reduced rate than, say, full tuition that you'll pay when you're an actual college student. So it's important to take dual credit classes for that reason. And not only that, you'll get a taste of what college coursework can be like. And then next, have the money talk with your parents. And parents, have the money talk with your child. Set those expectations for who is going to pay for what. Parents, maybe you're expecting your child to pay for their own cell phone bill when they're in college, or put their own gas in their car. And students, maybe you thought mom and dad were going to keep paying for those things. If you're going out of state for college and you need to fly home, who's going to pay for that plane ticket? How often are you going to come home? Just having those important money and financial talks before you go to college will help both the parent and the student be on the same page and avoid some headaches later. All right, so what can you do when you're in college? So take a look at your living expenses. Is your room and board, so whether you're living on campus, at home, or in an off-campus housing situation, are you living within your means? I know, I've seen a lot of other colleges. I tour colleges everywhere I go. I see what some of the on-campus living is like, and it is wild. You don't have to live in the high-rise on-campus apartment with a gym and a pool and a barbecue, on the top floor. You don't have to. You're in college. You should be living like a college student. So take a look at your living expenses and see if they are actually manageable. If they're not, reevaluate. Maybe get on a lower meal plan. Live in a safer but cheaper place. Take on more roommates. Cut those living expenses down. Work, budget, and save, of course, just like you were doing before. And if you set up those good habits in high school, continue doing them all through college. So then when you graduate and you have a real adult salary, you'll just go into that really seamlessly. Take a look at your careless expenses. And when I say careless, these are the things that are maybe recurring or the expenses that build up over the course of a couple weeks or a couple months. So do you have any subscriptions that you're not using, any streaming services, gym memberships, that kind of stuff? Those things that you pay for every single month, but you can forget about pretty easy. Um, when you do go out and go shopping, does the $1, $3, and $5 section in the store get you because those, pumpkins that are out right now are so cute? Take a look at those expenses because even though it's only a couple dollars here and there, over the course of a month, it really adds up. So take a look at that. Next, take advantage of your on-campus events while you're in college. And I know that right now that might be a little weird because, there's different rules about what can be on campus and in person and whatever, but take advantage of those on-campus events because even though you're paying tuition, you're also paying fees. And if you take a look at your fee schedule, your list of fees that you're being charged at the college, typically it's stuff like a recreation fee, an activity fee. I mean, it's wild the amount of fees and the different things that colleges can charge you a fee for, but those on-campus events are typically paid for with those fees. So you're already paying for it. So you should take advantage of that. A lot of times it's free food, it's free entertainment, and stuff that you can get to know your other classmates at your college. So that's something that's really easy to do. You don't have to go anywhere other than campus. And then lastly, if you do need to get off campus, use your student discounts. Colleges will typically create a list for discounts that are offered in the community that your college is in. So when go out, look at what student discounts are out there. So if you like to go bowling, maybe they have a student discount. You like to go to the movies, maybe they have one, or maybe there's a certain restaurant that you like to eat at, a store you like to shop at that offers those student discounts. Um, those are some things that you can just make your dollar stretch a little bit further if you do go off campus and need to look for entertainment elsewhere. So tips to keep borrowing low, some of those things I already mentioned. So maybe look at your living situation, live somewhere a little bit cheaper, take on more roommates if you can. Of course, food, look at your meal plan. Colleges typically offer a lot of different meal plans. So take a look at your eating habits and what you need. Of course, if you're an athlete and you're going to be doing, 3-hour practices and workouts every day, you're probably going to need a bigger meal plan than another student. So take a look at that to keep those costs down. Books, of course, you don't have to buy a brand new book every semester or buy all of your books brand new every semester. Sometimes you might have to just because the edition changes or what have you, but most books are available electronic. You can rent them, you can get them used, or if you have a classmate, a roommate, or whatever who took the class a semester before, even a year before, buy that book from them, just because you can typically get college textbooks on the cheap. So whether you get them from your bookstore, just from a friend of a friend, or you get them online somewhere, um, you can get your books cheaper than brand new. Um, yeah, of course, researching is going to be imperative to keeping your borrowing low, because making good choices up front, maybe picking a college that isn't super expensive so you can make your free money, your scholarships, your state and federal grants stretch further, so you have to borrow less. Of course, that is really important as well. All right, so who can help? Of course, here we are, Bank of North Dakota. All of our education market outreach staff is here to help, but you can also look at your high school counselor. High school counselors are a wealth of knowledge, especially for things in your community. They know a little bit about everything and a lot about a lot of stuff too. So touch base with your high school counselor. Any questions that you might have about career and college planning, they're going to be your best resource and your most easily accessible resource. Of course, your college financial aid and admissions offices. I know, admissions, we didn't get to see everybody's faces out on an in-person college fair circuit this year and through college visits, but admissions offices love talking to students, and they're there to help you with any and all going to college questions that you might have. And of course, the financial aid office will talk to you about paying for college. The Bank of North Dakota College Handbook has A to Z information on everything planning and paying for college. Of course, the Bank of North Dakota website, areyourreadynd.gov, College Save for You, and of course, all of Bank of North Dakota's social media, so our Facebook, our Instagram, and our YouTube channel. Our YouTube channel has a bunch of videos on college, careers, scholarships, paying for college. And if you go to our playlist, we have everything broken out into different playlists too. So it's a really, really, really great resource. Typically the videos are short and sweet and can answer your questions. All right, so that was financial aid. And now I am going to answer the question. So questions will be answered in the questions box. So if you do have any, go ahead and put them in there at this time. So the first question is, will financial aid offers be the same for every school you apply to and list on the FAFSA? It's unlikely that they will be the same, just because every college has a different cost, and the cost of the college, their cost of attendance, is the number that they use to determine a lot of stuff. So your cost of attendance, your estimated family contribution, there's a lot of factors that go into it. But no, your financial aid offer will not be the same in every college. So say at College 1, and you might qualify for full Pell. College 2, you may only qualify for 50% Pell. It just kind of depends what that information is, what the cost of the college is. So your aid will be different. The second question is, can grants and scholarships be used for trade schools? So trade schools is kind of one of those funny terms, basically meaning not a four-year college. That's how a lot of people use the term trade school. So in North Dakota, our two-year schools typically offer trade programs. For example, BSC offers welding, and the Highline program, NDSCS, offers diesel mechanic and some other programs. I'm trying to think of some other examples of what the other colleges offer, but typically that is what students, parents, teachers mean by trade school. So if that is truly what you mean, can grants and scholarships be used at two-year schools for trade programs? The answer is yes. Now, of course, there are some programs that may be too short or something like that. So it is good to check with the college that your specific program that you're looking into does indeed qualify for federal financial aid. So the next question is, must you accept federal loans before going to BND? So in order to get student loans from BND, one of the requirements is that students do file the FAFSA. Now you have to file the FAFSA. You don't have to accept any federal loans from them. However, Bank of North Dakota does have a $50,000 student loan limit for undergraduate students. So for undergrad, it's a $50,000 limit. So if you think throughout all of your research, you're going to need more than $50,000 to help you pay for your undergraduate education, um, you could apply for an exemption to that loan limit. However, one of the things that we look at is if you maximized your federal student loan offerings, because if you left federal funds on the table, that it's very unlikely that that exemption to borrow more than $50,000 would be granted. So no, you don't have to accept federal loans before coming to Bank of North Dakota, but you do have to file the FAFSA. And if you think you're going to need to borrow more than $50,000, you should get federal loans first to make sure that you don't go over that $50,000 loan limit. All right, so the next question is, how can I learn more about budgeting? So budgeting is one of those things. There's a ton of resources out there for students and parents and people of all ages and flavors of life to get tips on budgeting. Um, of course, Bank of North Dakota does have a financial literacy section, which has a lot of resources about budgeting. If you're a high school student, if you have, say, a business teacher or a life skills teacher uh, who can teach you about that, great. And, maybe your parents are absolute pros at budgeting. You can always talk to your parents too, because they can teach you how they manage their own money, and they can probably show you firsthand instead of, just examples. But as far as other resources out there, check out our YouTube page. I think we have a couple videos on budgeting, or will soon. And then, just listen to podcasts, do some internet research. There's a lot of good resources out there for learning how to manage your money, and they break it down really easy. It doesn't have to be a rocket surgery on learning how to budget. It can be as simple or complex as you want. All right, so that was the last question. Please, if you do have any more questions, go ahead and pop them into the questions box below, and we will get them answered. Give you guys a second. Okay, so not seeing any further questions. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Our next Career Discovery webinar is on Monday, October 5th at 12 p.m. So that's noon Central Standard Time, on military education benefits with Sergeant Jonathan Hofer from the North Dakota National Guard. So if you, a friend, or another student is thinking about going into the military after high school, this would be a really great presentation for them. And then also next week on Thursday, October 8th, we are having our second financial aid presentation, but it's going to be different than this one. Kathy Mueller from Mapping Your Future will be leading this financial aid presentation, but instead of covering what aid is available, she's going to dive into the FAFSA form itself, what's new with this year's FAFSA, and answer any questions that you or your parents have about the form. So students, make sure you attend this with your parents, tell them about it, have them bring their questions. Parents, make sure you have your students on this as well, and have them bring any questions that they might have. So those are the two webinars that we have coming up next week, and we do hope that you'll join us. In order to find out the schedule for what upcoming career discovery webinars that we have, you can go to careercompass.nd.gov and click on the career discovery tab in the middle of the page, and that will lead you to our presentation schedule, and then you can register for those additional webinars as well. All right, everyone, thank you again so much for attending tonight's webinar. It will be recorded, and then it'll be up on the website tomorrow midday. All right, thanks everyone, and we will see you next time.